Welcome back, Professor.
Welcome to Mandala today, 24th April 2024. My guest today is retired 80s industrial music pioneer Rip Van Winkle, who,
Yeah.
whilst being very influential, never managed to actually record any output. What was with that?
Or influence anybody, but yeah, still very influential.
Yeah, you had that feud with Tom Ellard. What was that all about?
Oh, well, Tom Ellard thinks he's better than he really is. Everyone already knows it, though. You know, he's the sort of guy who at a party will get on the drugs and jump up in a tree and point down and laugh and be like, I'm the king of all of you. Now, that's an anecdote. I wasn't there. I heard that, but I could believe it. Good music. Great music, really, but I'm sure the guy's a dick. But anyway, he to not get too conspiratorial here, he sort of suppressed my music. You know, he went full Michael Jackson buying the Apple Music sort of, label, and then just he shelved it. But it'll be released soon. Rest assured.
All right. Well, we'll be looking forward to it. Any record labels want to do some business? They're welcome to send us any propositions for that.
Yeah,
We'll be self-releasing it otherwise.
Especially if you enjoy what we're talking about today. So keep Rip Van Winkle in mind.
Certainly. Oh, since last time I was the one who brought forth the release of my choice first. I'd like to hand it over to my guest this time, so let's not be too selfish.
Yeah, well, in the spirit of industrial, electronic, post-punk sort of music from the 1980s, my first choice is for albums to sort of shine a light on, I suppose, is something called Sands of Nakajima by Bushido. Now, I assume Bushido is like a samurai term or one of those things. I've heard it used before, but interesting name for a band. And This is a sort of a group that I assume most people aren't familiar with. I forget the name of the label that put it out, but it seems from commenters on my bootleg of it that it was on some sort of well-known underground label with interesting artists. So you just have to look that one up yourself, like I will once we're done here, and keep exploring. But as far as this album goes, I don't know really anything about the group itself. It could be just a guy for all I know. But there's only 2 records, and this is I think they're both from the same year, or
I believe so.
Yeah, both in '85, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to put the spotlight on this album for today. I was sort of just listened to it, found it at random, and was kind of blown away by at least 5 different aspects of it. You know, it fits nicely into what we call like minimal synth, that sort of category. But then it's also sort of indefinable because it takes up so many different sort of styles. It's really sort of a combination of many different styles of its day, but also just being creative and experimental within its own sort of parameters. It starts off kind of very, very, what would you call them? Sort of like classical strings done on the synthesizers, and it's a bit pastoral, a bit spacey. It sort of mixes those two really nicely.
Thinking now, one track made me think of the Wendy Carlos music for Clockwork Orange.
Yeah. Wendy Carlos is a good example. That sort of, ethereal Moog music. It's a bit like that, and especially because I'm not sure what they used to make it, but it was probably, cheap synthesizers for the time compared to, what the professional studios were using.
Sure,
Things like Fairlights and other synthesizers that would have cost you like 20 plus grand, stuff like that. It's not made with those sort of synthesizers, so there is a bit of like that Moog charm to it.
Yeah.
It very well could be analog synthesizers. It sounds like it, really.
Yeah.
Analog drum machines, even. It's got a quite primitive electronic sound, but it's just a classic case of with minimal synth of like less is more, right?
Yeah.
We're utilizing, sort of cheap for the day, cheap tools, and being able to extrapolate more out of that than, what some groups like Kraftwerk and Electric Cafe could with all the new high-tech stuff,
Yeah.
There's an infamous case, if you don't know anyone doesn't know the context of that. I remember reading a biography of not Florian or Ralph. It was the drum guy, Wolfgang Fleur. Yeah, his autobiography was really interesting, and he talked about how after Computer World, Kraftwerk sort of fell into the hobbyist culture of cycling.
Yeah.
And they sort of lost, according to Wolfgang, a sort of passion for making music outside of the very technical cutting edge realm of music, as far as like technology goes. They would buy these super expensive synthesizers and then spend like a year reading the manual on how to get all the sounds out of it before really like experimenting in the way they would prior by inventing technologies and sort of using trial and error, according to Wolfgang once again, as the basis on which they would compose music.
Yeah.
I don't think Kraftwerk had a sort of a classical labored approach in their early days, which I guess they somewhat adopted after, according to Wolfgang, losing a bit of passion. So then you get something like this, where it feels more like I'm not sure how old the guy was when he made it, but it feels more like a fresh take on that sort of Kraftwerk robot rock sound, but done within the world of punk rock. But then also, one other thing I loved about this album is just how it sort of, like I mentioned earlier, it blends so many worlds together. Like even those pastoral, spacey synth moments, those sort of suites. One of them in particular, toward the end of the album, is like straight out of Foxtrot, the opening track by Genesis.
Watcher of the Skies.
Yeah, Watcher of the Skies. That opening sort of piano suite that sounds like the Star Fox ending credits from Lilac Wars. Yeah, it's got that sort of a few of those tracks on there. And they sort of bridge between the more industrial sort of, like there's a few tracks that are in the vein of like a DAF or something like that, like that dirty dance floor sort of music. Or like Test Department with, you know, various sort of samples that are taken from like BBC stock, you know, television inlays and stuff like that. So it's got that going for it. It's a weird mixture of, it's like punks making prog music. At the same time, they're also trying to make sort of DIY dance music as well. And if anyone's a fan of that world of like minimal synth or like it's got the music language which in the world where like all the prog artists, so like think of someone like Tony Banks, a keyboardist, who sort of like all the other prog artists, like members of Asia and stuff like that, or Mike and the Mechanics, or like I said, Tony Banks himself with like his pop experiments like Bank Statement and stuff. They try to go for a less musical approach and, dare I say, perhaps like a cynical popular culture music sort of like radio audience is what they're aiming at, which ironically enough seems to sort of alienate and also date their sound in a weird way, where this doesn't, it's not dated at all. Like I could like easily imagine Tony Banks, like given the proper inspiration or even connection to sort of newest and younger sounds that are coming into the scene, putting himself more in that realm and making something like this, rather than a sort of labored kind of lame pop experiment, you know, like I did not even experiment because they weren't really experimenting. They were trying to get a formula down. So this reminds me of like something a prog keyboardist would have made if they grew up in the punk scene, you know. That's, and it's just such a, at least before you get into anything you want to say. Also, another thing that I just loved about this album was like the loose concept, you know, the title, The Sands of Nakajima. And it's sort of, you know, there's this ongoing motif of the spacey keyboards almost sound like radiation and things like that. It sets a nice apocalyptic atmosphere for then the last track to be this sort of like Parisian waltz, almost as if it's played on an accordion, but done with synthesizers. And it's like a spoken word piece where it's about some guy, which I got to look up the biography of this guy actually, because it's an interesting song where I wonder if it's biographical in the sense of it's about like an American, it's like transatlantic in the sense of it's someone from like New York who's in a London cafe. They even speak in the spoken word with a bit of a British accent, and they sort of they're almost like eye stalking a Japanese lady who's there, and once they strike up a conversation, she asks if he says he's American, and she didn't realize, you know, she thought he was British because of the accent. So I wonder if that's biographical, because it's an interesting tidbit where she sort of lowers her defenses that this, you know, young British man's talking to him, but then suddenly it takes a turn about 1945, and it goes into her memories of, as the music changes to more chaotic sort of sounds, she sort of recollects her childhood in Japan as it's being invaded, and then sort of reflects on her hatred for the Americans. So there's a weird sort of interplay going on there where you wonder if the narrator, the male, is and even the creator of the band, at least I wonder if he's American, who's more taken away by that sort of Anglophile thing, or if it's just, you know, Brits doing a sort of exciting concept. But either or, I think it's a fascinating concept for like a minimal synth album. Once again, this is where it falls into the prog realm as well, because there weren't too many minimal synth albums that have that sort of over the course of an album like conceptual story. You know, it's not a literal like.
Yeah.
It's not running through a narrative necessarily, but it's all sort of washed over with like motifs that are reoccurring and ideas. You know, the main one being World War II.
Yeah.
And I suppose from a Japanese perspective. So yeah, it's an album that has like I've only listened to it maybe 3 times within the last couple of weeks, but it's just something you constantly think about. At least I did, you know. And I like an album that can do that. It makes you think about it when you're not listening to it. It's neat like that. At least I felt. What do you reckon?
Well, first thing I want to mention is as far as like these prog keyboardists putting out records during the synth epoch of the 1980s, two that came to my mind just now. Eddie Jobson of Roxy Music and UK and a couple of other acts. He was involved in... No, not Curved Air, that was Francis Monkman. But Jobson has a couple of albums in Green and Shapes. There's a couple of albums in the mid-80s which are quite interesting, I think. And I wonder if this album sounds like if OMD decided to go non-commercial and even more library music.
Yeah!
And the result is Sands of Nakajima. This is a brilliant album. I really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. It's right up my alley. And there was much to appreciate on here. Tidbits of an industrial sound, but also sort of sleek, refined library music.
Yeah,
it's almost like if, you know, it's developing with more contemporary 80s sonics, the library music sounds of Bruton music, which I mentioned Francis Monkman before. That's convenient. He was involved with Bruton music, as was Brian Bennett, Alan Hawkshaw, some other very, very interesting artists.
Is that a like a library label?
Yeah, Bruton
okay.
music. That's from the UK. Absolutely phenomenal stuff. As well as the stuff from Europe, like Bernard Feather, who's one of the great geniuses in the history of recording sound.
Yeah, definitely.
And of course, it's worth mentioning that, as you said, it's not like the sound. This is a hi-fi sound for 1985.
No, it's very much homemade.
Yeah, but there is something kind of beautifully timeless about it. And by the time Ghostbox Records are putting out homages to those old 70s library music, public information film soundtracks with, you know, Jim Jupp and the Belbury Polly and you know, the Owl Maps, all the, you know, just the greatest music I've ever heard in my life. But that stuff is so timeless, even though it had the hauntological label attached to it afterward, that there was a sense that this sort of music proved that, you know, there was more to analyze, more to think about. There was a psychological space which this sort of library music conjured, which, given the nature of Capital, was kind of brushed aside from the mainstream and to listeners in general. And with the internet now, it's easy to get a hold of things that are non-commercial, but at the time, you just had to hope you went to a slightly more esoteric record store to find this sort of thing.
Yeah, or you're a television show producer.
Point, yeah.
Because it's weird. I'd have to think about the dynamics of like how Capitol would work with library music for a little bit before I could say anything definitively.
Mm-hmm.
But library music in first impressions is almost a result of Capitol, in as far as, you know, it's not for consumers, but it's for like Muzak, the company. It's for elevators or for corporate suites, or in the case of like I said, television shows and stuff like that. So I wonder how that does fit in, because it's definitely non-commercial music, but it's made for commercial purposes. When I say non-commercial, I mean they don't sell it in the record store.
Yeah.
But it'll be used in like advertising.
Well, yeah, they're selling it to someone, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the difference between something like Muzak, which is more of a functional purpose, versus something like library music, where it's considered to have sort of a soundtrack artistic purpose. It's almost like the equivalent, maybe a more business-like equivalent to hiring a composer for a film or something.
And it's meant for like as incidental music and non-diegetic music, and, you know, in the background of a scene in a TV show or a movie, as opposed to, you know, a licensed song, which will be a pop song that plays and the characters hear it and stuff like that. You know? So yeah, library music is interesting like that.
Yeah, I think it's some of the more fascinating music of the kind of post-war 20th century. It's really, really cool stuff. And I mean, as much as, I mean, just the
maybe the world of where it can operate outside of Capital is because it, you know, it's not going on commercial sale for public consumption. it's more like these composers are contracted to make, like, they literally do it on contract and stuff to make music more broadly, and so it might even give these composers more freedom.
Well, also I think about something like the Radiophonic Workshop.
Exactly.
Which K-Punk famously claimed rendered, the entire 60s out of date the moment it kind of started putting out music. It's almost like the Beatles didn't quite get to where the Radiophonic Workshop got to in their experiments. By the time you get to Throbbing Gristle in 79, or Malcolm Clarke's Sea Devil soundtrack on Doctor Who's in 1973, it's kind of become infused within British popular culture and music culture. Whereas maybe you could argue in places like Europe, continental Western Europe, it arrived slightly earlier. Germany and France.
As in the music concrete and stuff like that.
Oh, I mean, in terms of popular music, like you had France had this. Disco is popular, but acts like Space were very electronic compared to the American equivalents.
No, that's definitely true.
And in Germany, Kraftwerk are quite big, as of Autobahn, right?
Yeah, all that krautrock stuff.
Tangerine Dream were quite
electronic
popular. To say the Tangerine Dream were popular is quite an immense statement, but in Germany they were.
They were, yeah, that's true. Yeah, definitely.
You wouldn't think of as a commercial act whatsoever, but it was just the times.
Because it was so out there. I think it did have an audience. Yeah, definitely.
Kids, young people.
Yeah, you look at old Tangerine Dream concerts, and they're very hippie-ish.
Yeah.
As in the crowd, and even the group themselves.
It's almost like an ELP sort of quality to it.
Yeah, definitely. It was like German prog in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's funny how an album like this can just go so under the radar, but fit into all these different worlds at the same time. And
it probably didn't sell much at the time. It was probably never reissued on CD. Yeah. And it's just, someone has it and it's probably
just a cassette tape, really. Yeah.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, well, Minimal Synth was, okay.
Maybe it is on vinyl as well. But it wouldn't surprise me if it was just a cassette release even.
Yeah. Yeah, right for rediscovery. That label that's in putting out all the Minimal Synth, get a hold of this one.
Yeah,
it's well worth it.
Definitely.
They did good stuff. They put out Solid Space Museum on vinyl.
I think it's Minimal Wave you're talking about.
They're the record label.
Yeah.
That would be it, yes. But they put out Space Museum on vinyl for the first time. Sounds great.
Yeah, even I bought it. It was good.
Yeah, good stuff, guys.
Somebody better reissue this one, I agree.
Yeah, brilliant release. I was very, very happy to listen to this one and very happy to talk about it today.
Speaking of Minimal Synth, the King.
Moving on to... speaking of, this is ground zero for the that nexus point where the electronic experiments became highly mainstream within British popular music culture, and Gary Newman's The Pleasure Principle from 1979. Now, we can listen to this album and try to perhaps... We might choose to imagine how it sounded in 1979, beyond revolutionary, like a true trip that even the sober mind can embark upon. Just transformative, totally innovative, and even listening to it now, while it is totally a product of its time, it's a product of its time in that seamless mid-60s psych pop has aged timelessly sort of way, where it's the basis for modern electronic, or modern pop is essentially electronic, and it's the basis for so much of this, and they're these perfect timeless hooks, rhythms, and I remember Gary Newman commented quite disparagingly on that accusation that synth pop artists just needed to press a button and it would be like hit single, and he says he wishes that was the case. These are all very considered and brilliant little songs. My favorite is Films, partially because of the topic at hand, obviously, but also it's just, even if that was an instrumental, that'd be one of the most fascinating pieces. It'd still be the most fascinating piece on the album, arguably. Maybe because it's an instrumental, it would help it stand out in a way.
Sure.
But it's a brilliantly arranged little thing. This is endlessly re-listenable, kind of potentially addictive, delectable pop rock album with some of the most enticing production of its time, and it's minimal now, although I think it's easy to underestimate how dense and beautiful these layers are. Stuck into this at midnight. It's not just one of these I
was being a bit facetious because Gary Newman's not really a minimal synth artist at all. Yeah, definitely not. Too much real bass and drums.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, the layers are quite dense with those, electronic harmonies. The constant, I don't even know what you'd call it, like crescendo, oscillating, a whirring noise,
Yeah.
which is all over all these songs. On the previous album and this one, definitely.
Yeah. But yeah, and I can't help but feel that a part of the reason that it's easy to dismiss this as a product of the times and not this major masterpiece. I mean, it can sound like a major masterpiece when you can kind of question yourself. But you're like, well, isn't it just adopting the technology of the time? Like, how does this compare to Matematic? How does it compare to Organization? How does it compare to Solid State Survivor, Man Machine, Computer World? Is it just knocking off Man Machine? Maybe, but it still sounds beautiful.
It's very Man Machine, but yeah, it is rhythms.
And here's the thing. You know what it is? It's because Newman didn't have an album even close to this level of captivating and memorability as Pleasure Principle. The Two Boy Army stuff was really, really good as well, which is before Pleasure Principle. But I feel like after Pleasure Principle, Telecon's okay. It's kind of just a diet version of Pleasure Principle. And then like afterward, you get this impression that the synthesizers have become more light, and by the 21st century, you get the impression Newman's career trajectory reminds me more of those guys like Elvis Costello and Joe Jackson, also British, who felt as though, oh, we're just new wave, kind of sort of rock and roll, we're sort of singer-songwriters in general, like, we don't want to be bogged down by, like, the new wave stuff we did. And Gary Newman, obviously he was far more synth pop than those guys were.
Yeah.
I feel as though he considers himself this versatile artist that was bogged down by his hits during the synth era, and that was just kind of a fad he went through as a young person. Although, unfortunately, I just think that's the most captivating stuff he did. And you compare someone like Newman to someone like John Fox, who, while he had that period, he decided to, rather than lament that he's not considered a major versatile songwriter, he always was that experimental, and he happened to have some commercial success, probably not as much as Newman did, or Ultravox if Midger once said, he kind of left them.
Yeah.
But Fox continued to be more experimental and abstract, releasing ambient albums into the 21st century, working with people like Harold Budd. And as Newman himself apparently would claim, he was just trying to knock off John Fox, as in the John Fox of Systems of Romance. Metamatic was released after Pleasure Principle, although they were essentially being recorded and devised at the same time, according to Newman. And so apparently some have even said that at the time, people accused John Fox of knocking off Newman, but this wouldn't be further from the truth. If anything, it was the other way around.
Well, apparently what he most took from was the vocal style of trying to sing like a robot.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, because I could picture people thinking that John Fox is ripping off the vocal style just because, like you said, Pleasure Principle and Replicas was first.
Yeah. I think this is a brilliant little thing, and I'm going to be morbid here for a moment. If Newman had passed away shortly after this album had come out, or like a couple albums after, we'd be talking about, oh man, this guy was a genius, what could he have done? But look, he was just a singer-songwriter.
It'd be a bit more of that cliche legacy thing going on.
He jumped onto this trend and it worked for him, and I wish I liked his later stuff more, but it's just not really my thing. I guess I like the kind of production and sonics more than I like, I don't know, like songs that I prefer catchy songs rather than songs that, if we're talking about songs, I prefer catchy songs rather than songs that sort of tell a story and you listen to them, because that gets a bit too adult contemporary for me.
Yeah, well, they're not melodic songs, really. Like, outside of something like Cars, the real melody is being carried by the synthesizer rather than the vocals.
True. That's true.
So, yeah. But in the same realm, I think you were completely correct by saying that John Fox was more of a technical guy and into sonic experimentation, whereas Gary Newman, for better than worse, jumped on a trend and did a good job of within his songwriting style, which he's kind of lifting a bit from Kraftwerk as well, where they're not vocal melodies. The melodies are all being done by the synth or electric flute, and the songs are like more acting like the lyrics are more like, sorry, the vocals are more like a rhythm track, and they'll just be repeating a concept like "We Are the Showroom Dummies" or something, or like "I Don't Like the Films." In the case of this album, the one song where it is more like a traditional melodic song in the songwriting of this album, as opposed to the instruments, which are pretty experimental, is "Me." That track, which infamously got lifted by
Basement Jack.
Yeah, to make
Yeah,
it great.
I love that song.
That's a great song, and yeah, what they sampled from this is just that very strange synth drone. That's probably my favorite track on the album.
Nice,
just because it very rarely does a strange like mid-tempo synth song work so well, and so I just find it fascinating for that. And yeah, like it's a good album. It can be a bit strainy on the songwriting front, where some of the synth like rhythms that'll bridge like verses, it'll just end up being the same pattern as Cars. There's at least like 3 songs that have that. So that's where this album is that's its one like where you see the seams, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
You can see the stitching there, but there are little moments of bliss on the album, like the 7-minute track, I forget what it's called, where you truly do get lost in this very like
conversation. Yeah,
and it's very hypnotic. Like even as I was walking around listening to it today, a lady just called from the porch, and I was like so hypnotized by the music that I had to jump back into reality for a second and look and be like, oh hey, what's up?
Conversation.
Yeah, like it's a very good album, definitely. It's yeah, I suppose it's not the most solid synth pop album that ever existed, but it's for its day, like for what 79, like you said. Nah, it's ridiculously good.
Yeah,
and I suppose similar to Kraftwerk, and John Fox, he was also kind of a pioneer of that, like, you know, Gibson-esque cyberpunk sort of, transhumanist, weird, like, sort of realm of philosophy even. Like, he was very early to that, like at Kraftwerk and then John Fox. So it's kind of interesting how you'll get a song like, it's on the Replicas album, the one before this. It might even be my favorite Gary Newman song, but it conceptually it fits in perfectly well with the songs on this album. It's the same thing, really. Those 2 albums conceptually. And it's called Me, I Disconnect From You. And it's like, once again, just very simple lyrics. He's just repeating it in the Kraftwerk sort of way. But just the overall concept of the song and then the way it fits in with the music, it's so... It should have been a cliched song from like 2010.
Yeah.
You know, about ghosting and things like that. You know, using technology to like remove oneself emotionally, like to emotionally distance oneself using technology. And obviously Computer Love's a great example of that.
Oh yeah.
But Gary Newman, these 2 albums, the Replicas one and even more specifically the Pleasure Principle, even once again from the name, it's sort of Freudian. The Freudian reference. They're on the cutting edge of this like technology as social isolation but interconnectivity at the same time sort of thing that was going on. That started going on later. So I think that's Gary Newman's great like conceptual contribution to science fiction at the very least, let alone music, you know. Like he's ahead of William Gibson for fuck's sake. Like that's very commendable. And supposedly he has like Asperger's or something. So that's where I remember seeing an interview with him once where he mentioned that's where he got these ideas of social isolation and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So it came from a very real place. So it's interesting that he was able to like connect that to technology in a very ahead of its time way, you know. He was feeling things that people think, oh, hashtag only me now. But like he was feeling them 30, 40 years ago, like hashtag everybody, right?
Stuff you read in like J.G. Ballard.
Yeah,
or Lafferty to some extent, but Lafferty was spread.
Yes, like I think he was even a Dick fan.
Philip K.
Newman, So, fan of Philip K. Dick. So he's definitely getting pillaging ideas from sci-fi, I suppose, but renewing them in such a way that is like very relevant even now, still. You know? So I think that's what this album I most appreciate about it, and Gary Newman as a whole.
I was going to say something about this album art actually is a reference to a surrealist painting called The Pleasure Principle, also named after the Freudian idea from I think the painting from the 20s or 30s, you know.
Sure, yeah.
And it's a you could look for yourself for those of you who are using this. You know, you're obviously
it's one click away.
Listening to this on a device where you can Google Pleasure Principle painting. But just to describe it, there's a man. There's a rock on the table in front of him, but his face, his entire head is a glowing ball of light. And so that's this demonstration of the pleasure principle, which is in a sort of dreamlike metaphoric manner, quite apt perhaps. And
Yeah, fucking oath.
I'd call Pleasure Principle, this particular album from Newman, among my favorite. I know people occasionally you'll get asked a question from a music fan, what's the best album of 1979? And you go, I don't know, is it Metal Box, is it Fear of Music, is it Unknown Pleasures, is it Entertainment by Gang of Four, 20 jazz greats, how many jazz greats are on there?
Yeah,
I can't remember.
Track listing on that, I think
20 jazz funk greats, whatever the Throbbing Gristle album is called, along with several other things. Three Imaginary Boys, but yeah, I'd put Pleasure Principle there as well. Fuck, I think it's grand.
Yeah, no, it definitely belongs in that story. Like I said, its only weakness in my mind is just being a bit repetitive with its bridging and stuff totally. Like that.
Yeah,
but like that's minor, really. Yeah. That's just a very particular complaint. Like it's ahead of its time, and it's a good bloody listen, and good pop music that as well.
Yeah, brilliant actually. And speaking of really, really good pop music, are we going to move on to more love pop music?
Oh yeah, Scottish pop, man. What was going on? What was going on in Glasgow up in the 80s, man? They were trying to reinvent pop music as some like art exercise or something.
Yeah, from Simple Minds' Love Song in 81, a killer track, just down to, just there's some really cool stuff culminating in 1987. You want to go on about this one?
Yeah, it's by a group called Secession. It's their only album. It's called A Dark Enchantment, and it's from 87. Yeah, so it's another synth pop album, but that's a bit reductive. It's kind of like an everything album in the sense.
By 87, this is all kind of melded into the mainstream pop sound in a way.
Yeah, it's taking little bits from all the sounds that were popular in the English underground. Taking a bit of like that sophisti pop, taking a bit of like dub and dance music and post-disco stuff, and what do they call it, the Northern Soul, like the British R&B stuff.
Yeah, sure.
It's really like what they call music now, where it's like they'll say everything's like genre blending.
Yeah,
but people have always been doing that, especially people trying to make like art pop.
Yeah,
and this is a good example of that, just taking all the sounds and palettes from 80s like underground British pop music, and then just trying to siphon it all into one like hour-long sort of package. And yeah, I think it's fairly successful at that. Like it has a few instrumental suites. Like I said, it's got like a disco song, and I'm just amazed at like it's not even all electric, for example. It's not even all synthesizers. Like they'll layer in like guitar licks and stuff like that. Like I was even just listening to a track off of it today with a mate, and like during the like disco song, which I remember once my little brother compared to Reflector by Arcade Fire, and I was like, yeah, this does sound like Reflector. There's just a random guitar lick in it that my mate was like, what? That sounded like it was off like a heavy metal track, and I'm like, yeah, I know, right? Like
wow.
It's ridiculous. This album, A Dark Enchantment by Secession. Strange name for a band. I don't think they ever really, like you mentioned the other day, that none of their singles ever took off or anything.
Not particularly, no.
Yeah, and this album, I guess, just kind of came and went. And for pop music, that's like the worst thing you can do. But it's a real shame because, like, maybe it's just a bit too arty to be. I don't know. There's a few tracks on here that you could have like thrashed on the radio and.
Oh, they go off in clubs.
Yeah, they'd go off in clubs and stuff like that. It's just it's so dense. It's like, when I was listening to it the other day, because this is an interesting case of an album I used to thrash maybe like 8 to 10 years ago, and I'd thrash it fairly consistently over the course of all that time, but I haven't maybe listened to it in like 2 or 3 years, and so as each track's coming on, I'm just like, man, I remember this all so well, but having not heard it for such a while, I was able to sort of appreciate just how densely layered all the. Like, it's just, once one melody begins, another one comes in and weaves into it. It's almost like jazz-like in that way. It's almost like pop music or something.
Wow.
Yeah, I was just, I was able to sort of just sit back and look beyond just the vocal melodies and rhythms and, like, very electro bass and stuff like that. And sort of just appreciate the finer aspect of its like, arrangement and layering. Like, and once again, it doesn't sound like a super expensive record, but I just love how people could make such like cascading sounding music on the cheap back then. Like, just by being creative, I suppose. Yeah, like, man, the amount of songs on here. Yeah, if you played them for someone in like 2005, they would have thought it was like one of these acts trying to like bring back the glory of old electro pop music. But it was a band from back then that just no one remembered. And yeah, I guess I wanted to re-listen to it. It just popped in my head as I was thinking of things to do for this show, and I'm glad it did because like I probably appreciate it now more than ever even. So yeah, I just find it fascinating how like artful these guys were trying to make like, kind of banal pop music. To be honest, it's it's something to aim at even.
Well, I found intrigued by it. You said you became familiar with it like 8 years ago or something?
8 to 10 years ago. I can't remember exactly. But it was just a case of like a recommended YouTube video. I was like, oh, that looks cool. So I clicked on it and I'm glad I did because, it's a good one.
Yeah, this is really, really good. I became familiar with it this year as well. This year. Not because of this show, but like a couple of months ago, I was looking at synth pop albums on the RYM, and this came up eventually. So I might give it a whirl. It's terrific, and it turns me into one of these sort of came of age in the 80s like British pop optimists who say, oh yeah, I love pop music. I totally get it when I'm listening to this. I mean, I don't go as much for stuff like even stuff like that's kind of good like ABC, and then stuff like Simply Red or whatever.
Yeah,
I do have a soft spot for Stock Aitken Waterman and that sort of stuff. And so not all of it. I don't like Dead or Alive, but I like Bananarama.
Yeah.
I mean, not a whole album of this stuff, but just like the singles, Bananarama, Astley, Mel and Kim. And this is like an interesting bridge between the sort of early 80s, more sophisticated post-punky pop and that just like full-on like kind of cliche uber mainstream was huge all around. Sort of saturated.
Like Stock Aitken Waterman's a good example, like electro pop sort of thing. Yeah, definitely. It fits into both realms. Yeah.
I'm a poptimist when it comes to stuff like this apparently, and especially when it's like very very Anglo as this stuff is. I mean, it's weird that you'd associate this stuff with being very Anglo because pop music is a thing that starts as we know it. In that context, is like a Phil Spector invention, but the British just trying to make it their own. Yeah, we love pop music. I guess it's just the Beatles are considered just a major pop act as much as a rock act, to them. And I guess, and I guess maybe in the States or in other parts of the world, they're a rock. Beatles are a rock act, but they kind of just acquaint pop act, and the Stones are the rock act.
Yeah.
In the Brits' perspective, I guess. And I think the Kinks are a bit more distortion to them as well at that time.
Yeah, early on, definitely.
Yeah, that's true. The Who. But anyway, like very, very on board with this particular release. Succession, I almost wish there was more of it, but it's also nice that there's just the one release, not kind of a shitty follow-up or like a reunion album.
Yeah.
You just got this one glorious little item.
Yeah, no, it's just it's a one-off, but it's pretty long. It's like an hour, so you get your free's worth of it.
Yeah, what you were listening to on YouTube, or what we did is an upload, which is of the CD. There was a vinyl issue and a CD issue at the time. This is the CD issue with more tracks, and some of the later tracks are like remixes, I believe. But they're very enjoyable, and you don't mind hearing some of those songs again.
Yeah, the last track is the first track done in a club dub mix.
Yeah, it was very, very fun. I more than welcomed it, actually.
Yeah, and there's at least like 5 or 6 great pop songs on there.
Absolutely.
And even like similar to Sounds of Nakajima, it's got those like sweeping space synth suites. And then also like one sample industrial dance songs. It really is a mishmash, like mongrel of all the sounds of 80s like underground pop music. So I mean, if that sounds like it'll tickle your fancy, I'm sure there's a million people out there who haven't heard it who would love it.
Yeah, if you're on board with the 80s pop sound in general, the synth sounds, you'll love this. If you're not, it's not for them. That must be said.
No, unless you're like tanked in a club and it came on, because it's just good music.
Yeah, true.
As far as like private listening goes, yeah. I suppose the threshold is fan of 80s pop music or just dance music. But
That's
yeah,
true.
certainly.
Yeah, electronic music is like in the 80s it had come a long way to where it was in the 50s and 60s, and about the 2020s it seems to have come a long way to what it was in the 1980s. I might move on to my next pick.
Yeah, move on to your next one. Just before though, like you said, if you're going to listen to it, listen to the YouTube upload as opposed to the official upload, because that's a weird like retrack list remix.
Oh yeah, that's worth mentioning. Of Secession.
Of Secession. It's not. Don't listen to the official upload. They got to put a proper official one up. Yeah, please.
2024. Ski Mask has been operating for a few years now. He's got this is I think his fifth album, and he's from Germany. He lives in Germany, and this album titled C is, I think I listened to his 2020 album because it was one of the more acclaimed releases from that year on the internet, and I remember liking it okay. And I listened to this because it was a 2024 release. I was trying to keep up with what people are rating really highly of 2024 music album releases. I listened to this, and I was phenomenally impressed with how maximalized the 90s genre of vast soundscapes and kind of infectious, hypnotic, synthesized melodies and beats has kind of evolved toward. It's just the most, that's some of kind of my impressions the first time listening to it, and listening to it again last Saturday night. I'm thinking that music is better than ever. I completely loved this album, and it's everything I ever wanted from one of these sort of 90s tripscape electronic turn of the millennium albums, except it feels very contemporary and kind of restores that optimistic feeling for 2024, an era which is known for having a lot of very depressing music relating to and inspired by very depressing stories in the news, climate change, COVID, world population woes, wars. It's just morbid and terrifying and soul crushing. And so Ski Mask C has me feeling as though we're in a very, very good place, at least with our art music in an electronic format. I don't know how electronic producers, artists who are oriented around this sort of genre, how they feel about this album. I don't really compose music that much myself, not overly so, but I listen to this and I think the man's a total genius with this medium. I'm all on board with Ski Mask C, one of my favourite albums of the year so far, if not my favourite. There's a few interesting electronic releases from this year, a couple of them I'll actually also get to here. Ski Mask C, superlative, I say. What was your impression of the release? Am I crazy?
No, like you said, you just speculated on if dance producers would enjoy it. I could safely say if I played this album for my older brother, he'd think it was fucking goes off. Mm. Especially the ones who are like proper DJs who really know their stuff and listen to a wide variety of music. They don't just pigeonhole themselves in one particular type of EDM. One of the 1,000 subgenres. Like, I reckon they'd all dig this, especially ones who are really into the ambient sort of stuff.
Yeah.
When I was listening to this, it reminded me a bit of a throwback, to be honest.
Sure.
In the sense of it being like a contemporarily realized version of that 90s like ambient techno. There's a bunch of different
Woob and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, that genre, which I'll get into later, funnily enough. It has
true.
Bunch of different names for it, but it's essentially the chill out music. I'll get more into that later, but it's not for the dance floor. No. And it's what listening to this album reminded me of? I think you might have brought it up once, and I thought it was very true in relation to like Woob or one of those sort of things. That like it was the 90s equivalent of jazz funk in the 70s, where it's like this genre that critics completely ignored because it's not pop music in the consumer guide sense.
Yeah.
But it's like it's music made by session musicians or musicians who are using the studio time that they're allotted by, in the case of jazz funk in the 70s, like, studios that they've done enough session work and they're like, all right, in the meantime, you can, between the hours of 10 and 11, no one's going to be in, so you can use the studio there. and they come up with these great jazz funk experiments, you know. They're using this, it's a studio experiment more than anything. And that's the same as these 90s like ambient techno albums, I feel, where they don't even need to worry about a music studio at this point. They can do it with home studios and stuff like that. And primitive, in the case of the 90s, primitive like, you know, Pro Tools software. And they can just commit themselves to experimenting with dance music in a studio sense. And they're not looking to follow trends and... Because, you know, dance music's full of trends. Every year there's a new trend and you follow it to get a sort of hit song in the clubs or whatever. Whether it be, like, this amount of BPM or this type of bass in there. And then a whole new subgenre starts, right? Whereas that ambient techno stuff, it just reminds me of jazz funk. Because you got these composers who are given unlimited studio time to use the parameters of, like, funk music in the case of jazz funk. Or dance music in the case of ambient techno. To do these elaborate soundscape experiments using... the syntax of the day, but just sort of taking them to their outer limits. It's literally avant-garde in the vanguard in the literal sense, right? And this album does that. It's like I said, it's a bit of a throwback, but you don't even care when you're listening to it what year it comes from, because it's just music. Like it really where it fits into the narrative, I guess in the anti-Gary Newman sense, is irrelevant. Like it's just the appreciation of what it's doing is enough to be entertaining, you know. And it's a thoroughly entertaining, like, chill out album, you know. It's not demanding your attention. It's just it does a good job of, like, just if you let it wash over you, putting you in a tranquil sort of space. And it's very effective at that, like all the best sort of ambient techno albums are, you know. And then when you're in that washed over tranquil space, you go to places in your mind that you wouldn't have thought about. Like you go to places you wouldn't have gone because they didn't occur to you because you didn't think about them until just letting it happen, you know. So that's what music like this I really appreciate about it. Like it's just, and I think the creators know what they're doing when they do it. They know they're trying to hit these little like nodes in the human consciousness and you know neurology to try and sort of emphasize the in-between spaces of thought, you know. That's how I feel when I listen to music like this, even sober, like even just at work, you know. That's how powerful it is. You don't need to be drugged up to really appreciate it. It's dance music that, it'll change your mind kind of stone cold sober, you know. So I just think it's like jazz funk, beautiful in that sense, you know.
And just to give this away ahead of time, the rest of this and the other 3 releases I'll be discussing in the remainder of this program, they're all 2024 releases, and they're all releases which I feel...
Oh, there's one that's definitely not a throwback.
in a way, somewhat perfected older forms, or at least like... This ski mask could be imagined in the 90s as a very expensive experiment, but now this is not... I mean, I assume ski mask is... you know, well funded to some degree, but you know, this is a very elaborate. This couldn't be imagined outside of like a very expensive studio prior to 2000 and something. And it's interesting how by 2024 we have these releases which are totally perfecting and manicuring older genres, and this, while this could be considered an exercise in installing the new, this could also be kind of perfecting the old, so that we could have a new that is totally rejuvenated and free of retro trends, which, you know, popular music has always been burdened in that sense with, you know, things that are kind of sticking around, you know, for all that electronic experimentation in the 90s that people were celebrating. There was what they called the regressive rock of Britpop. You know, so there's always been that component of it.
No, definitely. Like I was saying, it was an underappreciated genre at the time. So it's great. There's still plenty to be mined from it. You know, it's great that somebody is. And I should say as well, I just listened to this on sort of a lo-fi boombox speaker. So I can only imagine what it would sound like through a proper sound system in WAV format or whatever.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Like, I'm sure it would be beautiful. It would not surprise me.
Yeah. Have you got any more comments to share about this particular release?
No, but definitely it's so relevant that, like I said, mining for genres and stuff, it'll come back up again. Some ideas drawn from this album, certainly.
Yeah, check it out.
Yeah.
Check out Ski by Ski Mask, absolutely stellar in my opinion. Moving on to your next pick here.
Fuck yeah. Doom. Born like this. No MF in this one. It's just Doom. Now, I guess people have sort of... If anyone's familiar with Doom, he has like a rabid, almost like cringy online fan base these days, you know? And supposedly it goes that this album, he drops the MF because it's more personal or something. But you can definitely hear it. Like, even one of my mates had a theory that, you know, he just sort of doesn't even like rap music. He likes jazz or whatever. He just listens exclusively to jazz. And I'm sure he probably would have wanted to make those Special Herbs albums of just like instrumental jazz hip hop beats over and over rather than have to go back to rapping. But I kind of like how this album, all these bars are like clearly very labored over, but it's done in such a way that I get the impression he wanted to get some sort of message out there, knowing that this would be the last rap album he does and the last bars.
Yeah.
Like, gone are most of the playful things, and it's very serious. Like, the most playful thing you get is like a weird rap about like Batman and Robin being like gay, which that song's fucking hilarious. It's such, like I said, it feels like he's trying to get some weird personal thing out there, because he even at one point acknowledges that he's writing the lyrics to this song while there's a chick like blowing him in his bed or whatever. Yeah. So there's this weird like crossing of intimacy and the fantastical like MF Doom shtick on this album where it feels apocalyptical, and I think that's what I like most about this. It's weird that I just sort of instinctively chose this one to highlight alongside Bushido and Secession, because like once again I feel it's got that weird apocalyptic like dare I say like industrial synthy thing going on it, like sonically. It's like it's such a unique sound for hip hop of 2009.
Yeah.
Like, 'cause it's still got, you know, one realm within the sort of backpacker, the 90s world. But, like, musically, it's just so eclectic that you can't pigeonhole it into any sound, really. Like, it's hip hop, but it's hard to get specific about it just because every single sort of track is just so disparate in its inspiration. And that's why I find myself probably coming back to it the second most of his albums.
Yeah.
The one I probably go back to the most is just because I really appreciate that backpacker aesthetic is that first album.
Yeah, Doomsday.
Yeah, it's
brilliant.
Just such a pristine sort of elaboration of that whole scene. But as far as like more experimental and sonically pushing the needle forward releases go, this album like just keeps me fascinated because I just want to know how him and however many producers and stuff made it, because it's just so strangely unique, you know. It's like, what do you reckon? Are there any other hip hop albums from 2009 that sound like this?
Not that I know of. I mean, there may be someone maybe more keyed into this world, but releases from 2009, there may be things I've forgotten about. But I mean, maybe you could think of some of the industrial hip hop which was coming out in the 2000s by artists like Dalek. That stuff's really, really good.
Yeah, okay.
But I mean,
because it does fall into the realm of sort of industrial hip hop, definitely. And yeah, something about this, the apocalyptic motif and theme that just washes all over the album, even when it's doing silly shit. I just find so fascinating. I want to think about it more, and you just look at the album cover and it's weirdly cryptic and like ancient. I feel there's a weird interplay going on this album between what's ancient and what's contemporary. He sort of found that middle ground in such a strange way that I just find it coming back to it just to try understand it more. But I think that's the genius of it. You'll never understand it more. You just keep listening.
Superb album, and I think it's now considered canonically the last of the really great album releases from MF Doom.
Yeah, I don't even know. Is there a full length after that that's not like a collaboration or something?
I don't think that's not a collaboration. I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's his last, like, even though once again, like the nature of hip hop, especially at the time, it's collaborative as well with his producers and stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's got a few guest verses, but it's the only one that's labeled as just with his moniker. You know? So technically, it would even be the last like Doom studio album or whatever.
Yeah, I think at the time it might have been considered a bit of a disappointment compared to how much people loved Mad Villainy and Food in 2004.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think that may have, I suspect that may have been part of what I mean, there obviously potentially have a reason to this, of course, but why DeMille was not putting out as much music after a while, because it's like he labours over this, and then people are going, oh, yeah, 4 stars out of 5, not as good as Food, yeah, pretty good, I don't know, and like that's
Yeah.
just like, you selfish pricks.
Well,
Like,
in the realm of music criticism, that's inevitable, unfortunately. And yeah, I think you're right. I think he probably saw that happen.
with the internet that was so easy to observe now, and hip hop fandom was very much, well, not hip hop fan, but on the internet, you know what I mean? You just don't know. There's
Definitely.
Get the opinions out right away, sort of thing. Have the take as early as possible, as though it's like a sporting event. And it's it can be very superficial, unfortunately. So it can be perceived as, at least.
Sure. Just like music anywhere at any time,
That's
really.
true, exactly, yes.
Well, especially within the consumer sort of thing.
Yeah,
the consumer realm.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, this is within the consumer thinking. Yeah, you can definitely see how people were disappointed at the time. But I'm sure the like hardcore fans who were into just what he made probably loved it. I'm sure they would have.
Look, I think it's now considered a major classic within
Yeah, there you go. It deservedly so.
Yeah, no, awesome stuff. And like, I think why Doom's really caught on to some of the younger people now is he can really come across as like, Operation Doomsday can sound now like an apotheosis of a certain more fun sort of, like, it's got all the sonics of those like more like laid back and playful 90s hip hop albums, but it's this kind of got this epic theme. It incorporates some sci-fi and fantasy lyrics within the sort of overall slight loose concept. And then Food and Mad Villainy, they sound like that fun period of like early 2000s optimism, and where it's like pre-GFC, and hip hop still in kind of an exciting early CD sort of MP3 iPod stage.
Yeah, MP3 definitely. That's yeah.
And I think that they kind of have this beautiful aroma of that era, I feel, and it's also like a little window into, and I've got nothing against College Dropout, which came out in 2004 as well. It's good, really, really good.
Yeah.
But it's a window into like pre, it's like it's a world outside. It's kind of, you're in the more like nerdy sort of like Cannibal Ox world when you're listening to albums like Food and,
well, those
and
are more
Mad
lyrical,
Villainy.
whereas Kanye bridges the gap and
Between Bling and
he joins more
College.
like between even like Nelly and then like rap or whatever, and it's a lot more melodic.
Yeah.
Like he's not even rapping really.
That's a good point.
It's more like it's more melodic, I think. But yeah, I definitely agree. And it's funny you mentioned that first album as far as fun goes, because I think that's what I love so much about that. Not just the backpacker thing and the jazz rap, but also it'll harken back to 80s hip hop. Like I think it's just a collection of his life's appreciation of the genre and watching it like evolve as he grew up himself. Like, because even at the end of like Rhymes Like Dimes, they'll be like, the DJ guy is like just going, you don't stop, keep on to the short shot. So there'll be references to like African Bombada. All the and I forget what they're called, but one of the like there's some rap group from like 1980 that have like one of the funniest songs, like the Boogaloo Jive or something.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll like reference that era of really just fun like pop and hip hop when it was considered a gimmick even. So he's a very well versed appreciator of that style of music. And it really comes across. But then in this one, it definitely comes across because it's so experimental. It's almost laying the foundation for what we'll get into later with like the sort of stuff that like that Simba album. Yeah, it's sort of laying that foundation of like there wouldn't be Death Grips without like Born Like This and things like that. Even though Born Like This is still in that realm of backpacker and jazz too, it moves like you wouldn't have Yeezus without this album. I think
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that he was a fan.
He would have had to have been. Oh yeah, I'll get more into it later, I suppose, when we talk about the later ones. But it's definitely a cutting edge album for its day, and it still holds up now as a thematic, sonic, and conceptual experiment. I feel so. Yeah, that's why I chose it for this.
I want to say my favorite release of the MF Doom tree, my favorite branch of it, is actually the King Ghidorah Take Me to Your Leader.
Oh, well, that
maybe not
album's
the very
genius.
best one, but like it's just for myself personally, it harkens to things that I love. One of the very first Godzilla movies I saw was Godzilla versus Gigan. And it's magical. I keep coming back to it. It's right up my alley. The subject matter, just a glorious listen. And some of the sampling is
the sampling
infectious.
is like the best part of the album in many ways. Maybe not the best, but it's great. Yeah,
It's glorious. Some of these are great guitar licks and
and all the spooky siren.
And occasionally there's these acoustic basses. I think even like very very good stuff. Very beautifully blended.
And I love the guy, the Mr. Fantastic guy, who's like a elusive figure within the Doom mythology. His verse on one of the songs of that album is hilarious. He rhymes Atari with doing jump shots like Robert Horry now, and it just pops into my mind because I saw a guy in a Robert Horry jersey today. He was like a basketball player.
Yeah.
He was always on the periphery of successful teams.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and similar to when I first heard that rhyme, and whenever I hear that song of King Ghidorah, I'm like, man. You always know somebody who actually knows a bit about basketball when they reference things like Robert Horry. It's like, that's how, they're not just saying Kobe or whatever.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that, about that verse. And to be honest, one of the things I like most about lyrical hip-hop is all the references to basketball.
Right.
There's so many. It's
Yeah,
amazing, really. It's a labyrinth in itself.
Brilliant.
Yeah. But yeah, no, this is... I don't know. I thought it deserved to be on here. I'm sure you.
I think it is brilliant. There's actually a cosmic criticism about this
Oh,
album.
nice.
A bit over a year ago, I think. I did one for King Ghidorah and Operation Doomsday and Food. I listen to some of those albums all the time at my work shifts. Actually, I was listening to Food at my evening shift last night. Actually, just on low.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. Speaking of hip hop, do we want to move on to my next release, or are we finished?
Yeah.
Here? Excellent. So. Who is Simba LaRue? He was born Mohammed Lamine Saidar in 2002. He's operating within Italy now, and he's released his debut album, Tunnels. It had an enticing cover art, so I could not listen to this when I was looking at albums released in 2024. And I've listened to this contemporary 2024 hip-hop album, Italian, and this totally fulfills that promise of, music that if you played it to someone in the 1990s, it's so, and this is maybe a little bit superficial because maybe the listener's in Italian, but this does sound like alien futuristic music. Even now I'm an English speaker. I actually worked with a number of Italians in a particular workplace at one point, but even if I gained a cursory knowledge of the language, the way it's being delivered here is obviously not a manner that is completely...
And the production's alien too, yeah. You could picture his verses in English and it would be just as alien.
Yeah, you're probably right, actually. But this thing is fucking nuts. Like, if you want something to take you out of the stratosphere, I mean, go for this. Like, this is... I was really sold on the idea that because sometimes people superficially claim, actually, mainstream pop music's more... avant-garde than things that's trying to be avant-garde with all this trap, whatever. Like, it's not really. Like, there's a purpose that it's not remotely, there's a purpose to it. It's not. But the point is, this is fulfilling a lot of the avant-garde potential of that sort of genre. And even though I feel like it's trying to be, it wants to make, it's not non-commercial, but I think the purpose is more to show off within the scene what it can do with production, and it's almost as though they're expecting potential commercial viability or at least cultural credibility within that scene, that locale, via a certain sonic creativity. This is so entertaining, and I love that. Each songs might be 2.5 minutes max. It's kind of punk rock in that sense, but it does feel very local and sort of like an album he's made, and he's expecting people who live amongst him in Italy and wherever he's living there to listen to it. This is his big statement. This is sort of
one of the tracks had a music video with 2 million views.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, no, it seems like it's sort of taken off a little bit, which that's interesting if that's the case.
This was only released on the 5th of January this year.
Yeah, cool. Oh, yeah, well, I hope it does get more popular.
Yeah, this was absolutely just captivating listen. I this is if you're tripping out and you want something to just zap you out, I can't recommend this one more. And this is gonna be a staple if I'm ever with someone who's also tripping and they haven't listened to this yet. I'm gonna play this for them, and they're gonna have an absolutely memorable experience. Can't recommend Symbol of Ruse Tunnel enough. I mean, I don't know what it is like. I think it was of all people, Mr. Punk Rock, the cooler Henry Rollins himself, Jello Biafra, once said he purchases albums based upon their album art because he had a good experience with the first Blue Oyster Cult album for that reason. And so if Jello Biafra is going to be saying you buy albums based upon their cover art, and he's not a prog guy, he's not even a Beach Boys guy according to him, then I mean, what more reason do you... I mean, this isn't John Anderson saying it, it's Jello Biafra. So if both sides of the coin are saying, cover art's indicative of what's inside, I mean, unless you're Molly Hatchet, then so be it, I suppose.
Yeah.
But even with Molly Hatchet, you know what those look like, so you know it's going to be Molly Hatchet, so it's a weird thing. Because they still look like... They've been putting out albums since the 70s, and they still have, centaurs and Vikings and barbarians on them. So
that's hilarious.
Just Frank Frazetta sort of stuff.
Yeah.
They're just having fun.
No, just on that quick tangent, I do agree. Like, the whole... who came up with the cliche of don't judge a book by its cover? That's literally how people would judge books, because if there's a hardcover or a soft cover, you know if it's going to be, from a respected press, da-da-da-da-da. Especially back in the day, or if it's a soft cover, a dime store book or whatever, it's, people... Yeah, you definitely do. It's your first impression. Obviously, the phrase is true. It's a truism in the sense of, look deeper or whatever. It should be what people say rather than just, don't always go with your first judgment.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of incorrect because, it's not specific. Yeah, it's just the way people apply it is incorrect.
Yeah, I agree. Totally.
Whether implicitly or deliberately, like Jello Biafra deliberately did, it might even be wise to deliberately judge an album or a book by its cover in many ways. At the very least, just to try it out,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's what it's there for, even. That's its function. Then it is indicative of what's inside.
Very rarely have I been disappointed based upon,
Yeah. I bought a copy. Actually, to be fair, I nearly bought it just on the cover. I didn't quite go full Jello Biafra because I knew I could go home and listen to it. But I first saw Sleep Dope Smoker as that reissue 2012 album cover that looks like June.
Yeah.
In a record store. And I was like, I've heard about this band Sleep. I'd only ever seen Dope Smoker on Wikipedia as the older cover. But I'm just looking at this and I'm like, this has got to sound good. But it was $50 or more back then. So it was very expensive. So I was like, you know what, I'll go home, I'll listen to it first. Then I went back a week later and bought it because, just that album cover made me want to listen to it.
Yeah.
I was a teenager, so I didn't have much money, so I don't want to commit to buying it. But the principle's still the same.
Absolutely, for sure, yeah.
But just off that tangent, this album, man, it was I think I accidentally listened to it out of order because of the link you gave me when I put it onto the premium music thing. I think it put it in a weird order.
Oh, okay.
So I haven't gotten the proper sequencing experience yet, but that's sort of... It doesn't matter for what I'm going to say, because I just found the music itself so fascinating. I do want to go back and listen to it in its proper sequence, but it didn't really matter, because like you said, they're all 2-minute songs. It's very dada and punk in that way.
Yeah.
And it just... It's a tribute to, experimentation within hip-hop music. And it's weird, because one narrative I keep hearing on the internet over the last year or so is that hip-hop is going into strange experimental new places and stuff like that. But it is true in a weird way when you hear stuff like this and countless other things. Like for example, a mate recommended me when it was freshly dropped, the newest Travis Scott album, and that album opens up with a sample of Gentle Giant. It's weird that hip-hop's having its little proggy moment at the moment, where it's for lack of a better word, it's becoming bombastic and trying new things in an almost unpleasant in the sense of it's not trying to be harmonious and melodic way. It's trying to jolt you out of some sort of musical apathy
Yeah.
and force you to like learn new syntax and things like that
Yeah.
through sonic experimentation. And so this album is completely indicative of what people have been saying when they say hip hop's gone that way. Like even one of my mates showed me some New Zealand artist who he knew who's like sort of taking off over there, and it's this hyper bombastic like experimental trap music as well. And I'm just like, holy shit! Like it's weird that you hear all these old heads on the internet talk about like the backpacker rap and the jazz rap and lyrical hip hop as being the sort of peak, but when I go back and I listen to something like early Doom or A Tribe Called Quest, an analogy that came up in my head while listening to this was that it's like I said, hip hop's in its proggy moment. It'd be like if in 1971 you were listening to like Deep Purple, and the old people are like, what happened to the shuffle? What happened to the roll in rock and roll? You know, what is this? And so it's like people in the old head world are thinking of like backpacker stuff. It may as well be Bo Diddley.
Yeah, good point.
To Deep Purple. And this is like really hip hop's going through its most interesting period in a weird way.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
I'd love to see what results out of it because like if you think about what happened after Deep Purple, we could be in for 10 years of interesting music derived from hip hop, you know?
Yeah.
So I really am hopeful, especially as like home recording techniques become more and more affordable. Like the access can only grow, or even like potentially with the like pattern recognition AI music shit. Like right now, I view that stuff as like the walls are down. They haven't licensed it yet and like, you know, legislated all this AI pattern recognition technology. And so it's very affordable for anybody potentially to go and just make stuff that they want to.
Yeah.
Like even I was talking with a guy at work today who like was very skeptical of it because for like kind of weird reasonings in my mind at least. He saw it as like, he must have, maybe it's his original opinion, but it sounded like something that was labored over, like parroted, in the sense of he was talking about how like it will put like people who appreciate music for the musicianship out of a job because now anyone can go and do it. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Like that world always existed where like there was technical music for technical music's sake, like I was saying before, ambient techno and jazz fusion and stuff like that. And then there's always been like pop music, troubadour, singer-songwriter stuff that, you know, is sort of can be made like sort of facetiously, but sometimes what it's doing is it's like cutting through a like sort of emotive ethereal place that we all share, and it's like able to sort of siphon that ephemeral thing and then reproduce it for everyone to appreciate. Whereas like the technical and that's what I consider more creativity rather than technical musicianship. And like as I was talking to this guy about this, I realized something like John Coltrane is a nice meeting of those two worlds, you know, of raw creativity and musicianship. And I feel stuff like AI and affordable home recording equipment is sort of falling into that realm now where anybody can sort of participate because everybody has the potential for that creativity, especially outside of the technical world. And I don't think it reduces the importance of technicality because, you know, you still got to learn when you're doing stuff. You know, no one's just, like with the Gary Newman thing, you don't just hit play. And people are thinking in those terms again. With AI, they think, oh, you're just going to hit play and it's going to make something. And it's like, nah, there's still a human behind it. It's not actually intelligent.
Didn't some people in the 80s think because of drum machines there's just going to be no more drummers?
Yeah, people thought drums were going to go extinct.
Now there's drummers all over YouTube.
Everywhere. It's become such a niche specialty, definitely. Yeah, nah. Drumming's, even though drum machine music is currently because of trap and
they
now
exist
we get library
concurrently.
Trap. They
coexist.
Exactly. No, they coexist. 100%. Because people there's still always a niche market for the technical appreciation.
Oh yeah.
I don't think AI will reduce that, but there's a bit probably of scaremongering I feel around that. So that's what I hope doesn't get in the way of innovative, creative new ideas. And I just like the fact that now, before all this stuff has been hyper commercialized and legislated and, you know, sort of regulated in a gatekeepy sort of way, I feel that the walls are breached. Us as barbarians better like get in there and pillage Rome while we can, you know.
Yeah, fun. That's good. Let's bring in Catholicism while we can. Bring down the pagans. That's where I'm at.
No, I guess I'm advocating for the pagans to bring down the Roman Catholicism.
Oh.
No, that would... oh, no, yeah, because the collapse of... But the barbarians...
The pagans, the barbarians converted eventually. They saw the light.
Yeah.
They were so moved by the story of Christ.
Yeah.
We're not going to go into Rene Girard territory right now, though.
Yeah. But they love them some Jesus, I suppose. But yeah, no.
Speaking of the Italians, Cimbaloroo.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's worth a listen. It's a strange sonic experiment.
Not only one of the more interesting hip-hop albums I've heard recently, but one of the best albums I've heard from 2024 thus far. Absolutely loved it. And now we're going to be moving on to, I believe, your next pick here.
Yeah,
1996.
Man. Speaking of ambient techno, hey? Rudy
What year?
Fidelity. What year is it? 95?
I think it's 96.
96, okay. Yeah, no, it's this is a strange album. The Durutti Column were obviously more famous as a factory hacienda 80s post-punk band. I guess now they're considered within the realm of like inventing post-rock and things like that. But it's just sort of all based around Vinnie Riley, and in the 80s, a drummer, I forget his name, it's Bruce something, but he was a great drummer. Just doing weird, like, sort of tribal rhythms and patterns on the drums. But by, like, Fidelity, I think in, like, the early 90s, the Durutti Column sort of, because of the nature of Acid House, especially being focused in Manchester, around clubs like the Hacienda, he sort of put his feet into that world of... I think the drummer might have even died or got sick. He was quite a few years older. And so Vinnie Riley, the guitarist and sort of mainstay of the group, decides to start experimenting with drum machines and stuff like that. Yeah. And then I think it fully culminates in this album, which is his full-on like chill room club music experiment. It's... like, this album reminds me of something like one I might get to later, the KLF Chill Out album.
Yep.
Where it's music that was consciously, I think, made for the chill room of a club. Meaning that, you know, once your ease have either, like, you know, starting on the come down, or you're in between trips even, there's just a one dedicated room for the club with less, like, bombastic, loud music. And it's got more of these ambient techno experimental albums playing to sort of, like, set a mood. Keep the psychedelic atmosphere going, but it's not like hard percussion in the same sense. Mm-hmm. And this album sort of feels like, because I guess people sort of accuse the Durutti Column of falling into the realm of, like I said, post-rock before, or like, you know, elevator music or whatever, these sort of like jazzy, no distortion electric guitar experiments over, like strange tribal patterns and things like that. Yeah. And it's like, the Durutti Column is like this very elaborate, like, weird mixture of classical jazz and like post-punk music that it's clearly done by some like musical genius, Vinnie Riley in this case, who sees music in such a strange way. And so I just really love this album because I guess it's his stab at this world of like chill out club chill room music, ambient techno. And it's so strange that, yeah, I guess similar to like what I was saying before with jazz funk, this album is an example where those two worlds can collide in such a natural way. And without effort, he's like just, you know, even his guitar noodling weaves itself into this electronic album in such an unabrasive way. You don't even, you might even think it's just like some synthesizer going on, but it's just this clean guitar, and all the tracks are just hypnotic, and they're all like a good ambient techno album, all like 8 minutes long, and it just puts you in such a strange space. And at least like 3 or 4 of the tracks are genuinely like transcendental, you know. So that's why this album is a must listen for anybody who likes 80s post-punk music, or like yourself likes ambient techno and that sort of like chilled out experimental dance music rather than the, you know, visceral dance music.
This is a really solid release. I'd never, unless you've played tracks from it before, I've never listened to this in full.
Here and there.
I wish I knew more about the Durutti Column post, like the first 2 or 3 albums, because I think LC in particular was a major masterpiece of that decade.
Oh, certainly.
And I just, you know, I always I like to keep up with, even if they go bad, what a group does later. You know, if I like their early stuff and people ignore the later stuff, I still like to know why. you know, sometimes it's obvious. You listen to later Gang of Four, Simple Minds, The Cure,
Like Gary Newman, you said.
Gary Newman, of course, and you go like, okay, yeah, that's not that great. Then other times you listen to later work and you're like, oh, I don't know, there may be something here.
Especially the less commercial a band is and the more it's driven by music.
Yeah, take a band like Wire. I think almost everything they did was interesting.
Yeah. No, definitely.
And I think I would say Rudy Column, from what I understand, fall into this category, as well as the group we'll be discussing a bit later as well. But no, I think this is the kind of album where if you played it for a Rudy Column fan, they'd be like, oh yeah, that sounds like a Rudy Column. And if you played it for someone, you know, who just was expecting to hear some ambient techno 90s trip-hop-esque music, this is seamless. It's unquestionably part of the genre, and the worst thing you can accuse them of is being scene chasers, but they nail it. I don't know what to say. It's the genre perfectly.
I think it's the opposite. I think the scene caught up with what he was doing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because it's... Yeah, like he was a weird bridge between jazz, funk, and ambient techno, and like...
I mean, Scene Chaser in 96.
No, sure, definitely. But, like, he was definitely keeping... Because he was just, you know, a resident musician at the Hacienda. So he was following where the music's going.
Yeah.
But, in the sense of using... But I think it's also out of convenience as well, because I think the drummer either died or retired or something.
Yeah.
And, so I don't even know if it's a matter of... It doesn't feel cynical in the, sound-chasing way. It's more like... Yeah, music caught up to him and he realized, and he's like, I could fit in within this realm and make something really good out of it, you know?
Yeah.
That's how I think of this album.
Yeah.
It's so seamless in that sense. It feels so natural, which I think is what you were saying,
thumbs up over here. I was, Rudy Column, just because I used to think of, you know, like I remember back in 2016, I got into like a bunch of those really brilliant post-punk acts who had a couple albums which are like some of the greatest music of all time. You know, we had This Heat, the pop group, The Sound of Really Great, Bauhaus, and I put the Rudy Column in there as well. Like, they were one I got into and I just couldn't believe how good it was. I was like, wow, some of this post-punk stuff, there was like a brief window where, like, you know, people might say this is about some 60s music or some early 70s prog rock music, but now this is some of this early 80s period, just some masterpieces, just all over the place. And, you know, there are, not that major masterpieces weren't released afterward, but it's harder to become aware of them, I think, because they're not as grouped together. Like, you know, you don't necessarily find out about the Son of the Moon self-titled until a bit later, for example.
Sure. Or even like Secession, you know.
You don't find about Secession, you don't find out about Test Department or Portion Control or...
Yeah, unless you do a bit of digging. They're not on the periphery.
Or even stuff like... Remember there's that...
Whereas Joy Division are so, like...
Joy Division, Sound...
They're the one that even like a...
Swell Maps are pretty well known for what they are, The Fall...
Joy Division are bigger now even than they ever
were.
I
mean, a lot of
an
bands
older work colleague came up to me and he's like, my son keeps telling me, he was just like an AC/DC fan.
Yeah.
He's like, my son keeps telling me to listen to Joy Division, what do you reckon? And then my other older colleague, who was a DJ from back in the scene, he's like, oh yeah, a bit depressing. And I'm like, yeah man, like, yeah, fucking listen to it. You'll like it. It's like good driving rock music, but also this like thing. And he was like...
Deal a bit of nice.
Because he mentioned, he's like, oh, it's just music that wasn't around me when I was at that age. Because he was from like a Bogan Beach suburb, you know? So they mostly heard, like AC/DC, or there was the one weird group of stoners who were like gothics who would listen to Black Sabbath.
Nice,
that was their thing. So it was either AC/DC or Black Sabbath.
Lovely.
And I just mentioned to him, the Joy Division world is like where that other colleague was like... The weird, like, underground music scene.
Yeah.
But I mentioned that it's sort of come to the surface now in a way.
Yeah.
That all those other things you mentioned, even Rudy Column more so than Joy Division, definitely have still stayed subterranean.
Seemingly.
They haven't floated to where like a 64-year-old man will be, you know, say, my son's telling me to listen to this band, should I?
Yeah.
So it's funny how that works. Early, the buried classics, I guess you'd call them buried treasure. And this album feels like, because like you mentioned LC and the first album of Rudy Column, The Return of, the albums that have floated to the surface within the music fandom world or whatever. Though this album in particular, Fidelity, I think is sort of on the rise. Cool. I hope so. Like a traveling gypsy man who I bought a bunch of records off for fairly cheap. He mentioned that like there was this cool band called the Rudy Column, and he just got this cassette tape called Fidelity.
Yeah, wow.
And I was like, man, that's so like holy shit. You're referencing this album? So yeah, I think this album's on the rise as well. I hope so.
That's terrific.
So yeah, that was my fourth choice.
My fourth choice will be, this is, yeah, of course, another 2024 release. I mentioned them in the last program. From France, born in 2000, Atomiste. And this 2024 release, Sunreacher, 149-minute long track. Now, I don't want to go here because it seems like a bit of a cheap thing to bring up, but sometimes this sort of stuff is most entertaining when you're under some substance and you're just focusing and thinking about everything, and you're letting this sort of paint the walls around you, the surfaces in front of your eyes, although even just as sort of a morning mood enhancer, or as something which, you play it as you're cleaning, driving, sorting files on a computer. I think there's something, one gets to know that there is a very laboured and considerate series of decisions made within a composition like this. Even there are people, now we all considered Brian Eno the master of this sort of thing, but even there are people, including people who were around when this ambient music started to be released by Eno, and they were familiar with him earlier, they just said it was all sounded like a refrigerator humming. If you're an alien listening to the genre, if you're a layperson to the genre, of course that's what it sounds like. But I would be...
It's a very superficial. It's the first thing you notice.
And I wonder if what people who are, have listened to a lot of ambient music, where they stand on something like this, because I listen to it and I think this is an extraordinary piece of work, although I do wonder if I'm just so particular to the genre, where it's just like me, as someone who likes 70s prog, listening to something like Shadowfax, or some of the more cliche, like Visitor 2035, and some of the more cliche but really glorious prog of that ilk, or even some contemporary stuff that apes off it tremendously, like Blue Mammoth, or less contemporary like Marillion and those in that Fish era for a little while there. But it's just one of these things where I'm really fascinated in general with the idea of what Atomiste has done with his discography, especially 2022 onward. We have a cohesive, kind of, very intuitive set of, cover illustrations coupled with these themes of absolute despair and desolation. It's like he's one of these, it's almost like the despairs of Edgar Allan Poe and Jean Paul Sartre kind of filtered into these records about words, just totally evoked by electronic instrumentation solely. And I think the very elaborate titles of some of the songs. Obviously this is just Sunreacher, of an album called Sunreacher, but just the sentences which make up the 4 tracks of the Spectator project, all the kind of Catholic Latin names in the Salvation Sessions, some of the titles in his album Final Visions, and in the artwork to that being this sort of like sinister looking like crayon watercolor of a house by an ocean, but then you kind of think, partly because it's in relation to the rest of the illustrations in his oeuvre, there is something kind of underneath the surface that isn't quite right, like the old American Gothic painting. I think this Atomiste Sunreacher is one of the best releases so far from this particular artist. My favourite's probably Encounter the Machine, and I really like the aforementioned Final Visions. And this Sunreacher, I think, is one of the more enticing 2024 releases, along with the Encounter the Machine, which I mentioned, that's also from 2024. I believe it was released either on the 1st or maybe even the 4th of January this year. He's the most exciting artist right now, as someone who just likes ambient music for its own sonic sake, for the idea and the philosophy of it. And I feel like it's the genre which most wants to very inherently tries to transform the way you think. It can transform a space into something. You can totally reassemble your thoughts on the space around you, which is, considering it's a location you might be seeing every day, a very challenging thing for a piece of music to do, especially within like unexpected paradigms. Like a pop music song might make things happy, a metal song might make things seem a bit more indignant, and a prog song evoking fantasy might make you think of Tolkien or Dungeons and Dragons a bit more so in an office block, but an ambient track might make you realise that the office block is a thing of ballady and beauty, and so is John Fox, but that's kind of the lyrics of him, isn't it? But there's a bunch of things going on there, and I'll spare everyone for now and move things over.
I completely.
Rip Van Winkle.
What you just and Rip Van Winkle is a key like sort of metaphor for it as well, because what you just said I think was completely true. I don't normally, outside of like I guess taxonomically, technically in a semantic way, I disagree in the sense that this album's not ambient, it's drone.
Sure.
Because in the way that like an ambient will dissipate and then return, this album is just a constant harmony of like added sounds. At one point you do get the one sort of ambient Doppler effect, that's just one part of the suite. So I guess in that sense I'd consider it more drone, and I bring this up because I don't normally I listened to these albums today as I was outside working and walking, and normally I'll just listen to like pop music with rhythms while I do that, because naturally like listening to the Gary Newman album, its robotic and mechanical rhythms are very good for walking. Actually, you do it at quite a nice pace. So I don't normally listen to drone music and stuff like this while I'm walking around outside, playing it out loud. I'll listen to, more rhythmic stuff. And like, I've always considered this sort of labyrinthine music as more something you will listen to at home and sit down and, just do whatever you're doing, absorb it. It can even be ambient and background music, or it can be what you're, focusing on as you're having a smoke or something.
Mm.
And, but I was glad I walked around listening to this album, because the exact effect, which I think is most important about what I agree with you there, where it can change a space, that's exactly what this album was able to evoke, because I'm walking around and the only comparison I can feel for it about 10 minutes in, once the music's really starting to hit, is that like I'm just washed over, and it becomes like a sort of weird space-time, like a breaking down paradigm, where like the closest description to the feeling I had whilst listening to this walking along was like the way Philip K. Dick described California in one of his freakouts, like turning into like the overlay. It was all the same, but then the overlay changed, the aesthetic changed, and it was ancient Rome. And he's like, walking down an ancient Roman street. And this is what this album was able to sort of evoke out of me as I'm walking along. And so it put me in that weird sort of hyper-reality space in a very natural way. And it's very rare for like music to be able to evoke that, especially in that sort of paradigm, I feel, like just walking around outside. So I'd like to see how other drone music can do that. But this album was very affective, and effective. It was both. And for a drone album, especially in such circumstances to do, there's something definitely magical about it. It's, I'd be curious as to his constructive process of it, because, like, even at one point, because I'm walking around in fluoros, I literally feel like I'm a bumblebee. And it was an amazing little poetic moment where, like, I realized, in a way, I'm a fluoro thing that's, like, projecting out this, hum, a buzz, essentially, at the same time that I'm going from node to node with information. So in a way, I am being a bumblebee.
Wow, brilliant.
And so for music to do that, to like evoke such strong, creative thoughts, I feel is very powerful. So it's a great album for that. And there was one other thing I was going to say about it. I can't quite recall off the top of my head, but that was it. It was as I'm walking around, it made me feel this sort of drone music. I've had this thought before, but it definitely evoked it again, where, when people talk about the music of the spheres, that old ancient Greek concept of like sort of harmonious relationship of the universe and the objects of the universe to one another.
Yeah.
And I feel that like droning music like this, it's just like, it eschews all melody and for the most part rhythm. A drum rhythm does very minimal, a pounding, like tribal thing come in about halfway into this album. But for the most part, it's just like harmonies built upon harmonies. And it reminds me of, when you hear the static of the universe as displayed through our audio, and it's literally just noise static, like drone. And, even like I uploaded an album once I should re-upload, which was someone recording the gravitational force of the moon on the Earth.
Wow, yeah.
And it just, once again, was a sort of drone. And you realize that, like, in many ways, this sort of droning music is the universal music. And so that's what where it is a bit underappreciated is that. It is the literal music of the spheres, at least in my mind. Like, a properly scholarly person can critique me on that. I'm sure I'm not 100% correct or whatever, but that is sort of, what drone music at its best is able to sort of pull out of the human condition. And so, yeah, you can't help but appreciate an album like this. Definite listen.
I'd like to read out aloud because you made me... I wanted to anyway, but you definitely made me feel as though I ought to.
Yeah.
This is Atom East's statement on the Bandcamp page for Sunreacher.
Yeah, nice.
Such a special experience recording this album. It all started when I became familiar with a very powerful free VST plugin named Vital. The way it allows you to fine-tune massive drones with basically the only limit being the time you'll spend on one preset got me into an addiction of making lots and lots of presets from scratch for various uses. Maybe I'll publish a pack of my own today, who knows. But this album is made using my favourite drone, originally named Beyond Comprehension and later renamed Sunreacher. I then saw the potential of a full album using this drone and coupled it with distorted guitar drones. First time doing post-rock, but I think this one ends up really good. Just a swallow everything long crescendo that then fades away into uncertainty and other unexpected things.
Crescendo, that's the
won't spoil it all. And yes, there's a story behind it as usual. Give me your best guesses. But yeah, Sunreacher feels special to me even. Felt like I was doing something way beyond my comfort zone and somehow succeeded. Enjoy.
Definitely, yeah.
Well, I myself...
Yeah, it's certainly an audio experiment through and through.
Yeah, well, I myself feel as though Atom East has fairly succeeded. This is one of the best ones.
Yeah, experiment worked. That's what they're there for.
Suppose we'll move on to your final of the day.
Yeah, speaking of experiments, I suppose. My final one is Sonic Youth, 1,000 Leaves. Apparently, I was reading just on the little preamble to the YouTube thing for this album. It'll have a clip taken off Wikipedia. Apparently, this album was made in their own home studio. They finally have a home studio, and then it had some weird critical comments about how because of that it's over labored, and I was just like, man, I love how it'll say this in the preamble to an album you're gonna listen to. It'll take a bit from Wikipedia and have these weird arbitrary critic takes on what the album sounds like. Though I did find the tidbit about the home studio interesting. But yeah, no, this album's definitely an experiment. You can tell. But I guess in a weird way, it's not the most well-known Sonic Youth album. And like I said, according to that YouTube preamble, was sort of a bit critically panned in its day for being, I don't know, laboured over or something along those lines. They were having to go with Kim Gordon's singing or something. Yeah, and it's just it's so indicative of when a band, especially within the alternative indie or underground world, get that sort of critical acclaim. There's this weird, it's almost impossible for people to reassess the music, their next music as just music, They can't remove it from the whole realm of the spectacle around that band too. Especially in the case of someone like Sonic Youth, who have an album like Daydream Nation, which deservedly so is considered an all-time classic and very experimental and sort of cutting edge. But I feel that maybe it was just sort of, it's weird how an album like this, maybe it's not quite as perfect in a weird way as Daydream Nation, but the reason why I chose this one as opposed to that for this talk was because this album, for some reason, just me in particular personally, it keeps pulling me back in a weird way. I don't even know what it is about it. It's multiple of things. But I keep coming back to it because I feel there's some sort of thing in there it's trying to say that hasn't gotten out there yet. No one's sort of articulated it. And I'm not going to do it here, obviously, because there's so much one could personally take from it. But yeah, I just feel a very personal connection to it in such a weird way. It is literally a siren that keeps calling me back to it for maybe poor purposes, but I really want to sort of find out why. And I guess on a superficial level, I love the weird almost Southern Gothic aesthetic to it. It's got this weird the sonic textures of it reminds me of like a Sunday, which funnily enough is the second song on the album. It reminds me of a Sunday afternoon as you're watching the sunlight come through the leaves. Maybe all this is... No, I feel like I've made all these connections separate, and it's not even due to the name of the album and then a song being on it called Sunday. Like, I honestly think it sounds like one of those labored Sunday afternoons when you're a kid and you don't want to go to school the next day. And the sun coming through the leaves is just, like, really annoying. It's almost giving you a headache in a weird way.
Yeah.
And, like, that's the aesthetic of this album down pat. But then I guess when you really are listening to it quite fervorously or technically, it reminds me of like they must be going for like a Spiderland thing. Like I feel they listened to that album and they wanted to make their own Spiderland even. So maybe even that's why this keeps drawing me back. Like Spiderland it is that weird cryptic, like, you know, new music beyond post-punk guitar and bass experiment thing going on there. Like they're trying to literally, like the genre label post-rock, like they're trying to even go beyond rock music, right? And make some sort of new music using rock instruments. And especially like with the longer songs on this album, you know, there's like a 12-minute track and stuff like that. Like I mentioned, Sunday before is fairly straightforward, especially for Sonic Youth. It's more indicative of like their early 90s stuff. But it still has the same aesthetic as the rest of the songs on this album. That weird... Like, when you listen to the guitar, it's similar to Spiderland. It's like something you're holding onto something fragile and it's falling through your fingers or something, you know? It's like sand falling through your fingers. It's such a creative way to use the guitar. Like, I'm just astounded at the sounds they were able to get out of these home studio sessions. Like, I don't know. I feel that within the canon or whatever, the critical consensus of the Sonic Youth discography, this one is a bit like sort of overlooked as a sonic experiment and just more seen as like I don't know, like just an album to pass over and like not even worth listening to. And I feel that's disappointing because there's so much to this album, like especially if you go into it without the weird pretensions that are attached to a band like Sonic Youth, you know. And I feel that's key to sort of people overlooking sonic experiments with these sort of bands, you know, like this album is indicative of. What do you reckon?
Well, you know, like, I would tend to think of, you know, I foreshadowed earlier that Sonic Youth are one of these bands that they are a group where it's worth exploring the later stuff because, I mean, Sonic Youth don't necessarily have a period of people think they, quote, go bad, unquote, although I think they get relatively good ratings, reviews up to the end, although I would argue that it's all... I don't think there's a point where it's significantly lesser.
And it's all in the shadow of Daydream Nation.
Potentially as well, yeah. Like, I think right from Bad Moon Rising, you have a series of classics culminating in Daydream Nation. There's that Whitey album by the credited to Chicone Youth, which is worth listening to. That's terrific.
Yeah, I actually haven't heard that one.
Goo and Dirty, I love a lot. And then, if we're going to point out one as being a bit lesser, I'll go with the cliche choice of Experimental Jet Set, Trash and No Soap, Stop, whatever that's called. No Star. And yeah, it's not my favourite. Washing Machine's among my favourite of the Sonic Youth albums, so they picked it up pretty quickly. And I think Thousand Leaves is another installment of quality Sonic Youth coming off of Washing Machine. I mean, it's almost like they're carrying on the momentum of Washing Machine. Very long songs, and it's the one thing I think you could dig about Thousand Leaves is that Sonic Youth aren't doing anything revolutionary within their own oeuvre, although they're presenting more creativity within their little paradigm there. And I think if you're a Sonic Youth fan, it's tremendous fun. You've got this album to go back to. Like, if you're a new fan, you know, if you're like 20 something, well, let's say 22, and you get into Sonic Youth now, you know, and you go, okay, so Bad Moon Rise, and, you know, it's all just, you've got albums from 1983 up until 2009 to potentially listen to, and you go, all right, so Bad Moon Rising up to Dirty, that's considered the good stuff, and then you're going to keep listening through to Washing Machine and Thousand Leaves, and you're going to be thinking, well, this stuff's also good. Like, why is it considered lesser? Like, if that's what I imagine. It's easy for me to imagine that, unless people are so caught up on. I mean, it depends where they start, because it's easy to imagine someone starting with Goo, Dirty, maybe even Daydream Nation, and the rest of it's a bit too out there for them, like Evol and Prior.
You know
Who
what?
knows?
It reminds
And Washing
me
Machine
of-
is a bit out there even for them, to be fair. Maybe they were
Yeah.
experimenting a bit more than I'm thinking, because I love them so much, but to me it's all just Sonic Youth.
Oh,
But
yeah,
maybe it's
yeah.
like,
Well, Washing
maybe
Machine.
some of it goes a bit further. I
it
just
has
like
a-
that
It
stuff,
has
so
a
to me it's
20-minute
fine.
like drone track.
Yeah.
With a few verses thrown in there, but it's essentially a 20-minute drone song. So
Yeah.
no, Washing Machine's very experimental as well. But it's more like Sonic Youth, whereas this album feels like, yeah, that's what I was, I guess, wondering. Like, it feels like Sonic Youth trying to do something else, and I think it might be them trying to do Slint. Because there'll be songs where it's like not Thurston Moore or Kim Gordon. It's either got to be the bassist or the drummer, or maybe the other guitarist. Sorry, the bassist is Kim Gordon. The other guitarist, Lee Ronaldo, or the drummer, Steve Shelley, who are doing the spoken word thing, and it literally sounds like one of the Slints.
Yeah.
So I think that's might be what they were sort of getting at, trying to like
potentially.
be influenced by a younger band than them that was sort of on the rise around that time, critically at least. And I just think it's their throw into, I guess, similar to Rudy Column, rather than scene chasing, the scene or sound sort of caught up to what they were doing, and they sort of jumped on it and created like an almost perfect version of it in a way. So yeah, no, that's why I think this album's worth it.
I think it's really good, and I think it's, as for the albums that Sonic Youth would put out after Thousand Leaves in 1998, I really, really, really like Murray Street. I would say I remember liking Murray. My memories of Murray Street is that I like it more than A Thousand Leaves.
Yeah,
But
that's considered like the good late album.
But other than that, I'd say A Thousand Leaves is probably stronger than NYC Ghost and Flowers, which is okay. And then Sonic Nurse, Rather Ripped, and The Eternal. Rather Ripped I don't like so much. The Eternal is not bad at all.
Yeah.
Sonic, I don't like Sonic Nurse so much, it's alright. That's my memory, maybe I'd like it more now, but I think Thousand Leaves is better than all the 21st century stuff, because the rest of it's all 21st century stuff actually.
Yeah.
Other than Murray Street, I think it's better than all the stuff that came out afterward.
Yeah, no,
So
it's
they're
great.
there. I feel quite positively here, yes.
And I guess the whole like being overshadowed by the critical reception of Daydream Nation, that sort of concept, that I guess in my own personal consumption, that reminds me of the pick I was initially going to do, which is REM Fables of Reconstruction.
Yeah.
Then I chose this one for some reason instead, but next one I might get onto Fables.
Cool. Yeah.
Because
nice.
it reminds me of, REM kind of remind me of Sonic Youth in a way, where at least like critically rather than commercially in this case. Or no, kind of like Sonic Youth, because their most commercially viable albums were after the critical one.
Mm-hmm.
And so like REM it always seems like their albums got like sort of overshadowed by Murmur, like an amazing album.
Yeah.
But then you get something like Fables of Reconstruction, which is once again like sort of Southern Gothic and reminds me of like this album in a weird way, and it sort of fits into their discography in a similar way, I feel. So yeah, I might do that one next week.
Nice.
Those albums feel like intrinsically tied together for some reason. Maybe it's the murkiness. They do both sound like they were recorded in swamps.
Yeah,
with that oppressive sunlight going through
yeah.
trees and leaves, you know.
Yeah, we got good stuff here. Go
Yeah,
on.
do you want to get onto your last one?
Yeah, well, it's excellent we bring up REM, and we have us thinking of bands from Athens, Georgia, such as REM, such as a band called Pylon, because today we're talking about
Pylon.
Omni and their fourth album, Souvenir, released this year. Who knew there was still so much more catchy, beautiful, infectious music to be composed within that sort of like Syd Barrett British pop influencing via American music, indie music of the mid 80s sort of creative paradigm. I mean, my goodness, I listened to every track on here, and I've listened to this twice, and I think every track on here is just beautifully, perfectly, admirably, almost enviably hooky. I can't believe that this stuff is still possible. I mean, it's like everything the post punk slash post-punk revival bands wanted to do, but they just weren't creative enough. I need to listen to this band's 3 previous albums because I thought this was just absolutely extraordinary. I got to plug and link this in the description because the channel that this is uploaded is also uploading a lot of other new bands, which, I mean, there's some stuff here I'd love to listen to more of from this channel. I can't remember what it's called right now. You'll see it in the description. If I remember to, I hopefully will. And, like, my goodness, I could... There's going to be probably a lot of 2024 albums. If we keep doing Mandala, I'd like to be using this as an opportunity to articulate my thoughts on contemporary albums, you know, and just trying to get these out there. Because, I mean, if there's... I mean, the artwork's pretty good on some of the channels upload, so that's partly why I want to check the music out. But if it's anything like Omni Souvenir, possibly named after the classic OMD hit single, I mean, not this necessarily sounds like OMD-esque music, really, but these guys sound like they absolutely adore the kind of music that inspired bands like Pylon and early REM, as well as those bands as well, of course, bands that continue trying to do that thing like Brian Jonestown Massacre and Dandy Warhols. But I remember rather liking a Brian Jonestown Massacre album, a self-titled one from, I think, 2020 or something, thinking it was thoroughly entertaining. And I'm thinking, yeah, there's still more stuff to be done here, potentially. I mean, you know, this band's got like 24 albums, maybe one of them's got to be good, maybe it's that one. And this band by album 4, this is absolutely brilliant, and like, it may be kind of the sort of throwback music, and it's not revolutionary, but like... Isn't it kind of a revolution in and of itself that there's more to be done with this creative formula? It's so elastic, and I think these guys are they're so brilliant at what they do, and I think pretty much every track on here it's an undeniable winner. I'm a champion for Omni Souvenir. How about yourself, Ian?
Yeah, well, no, that's too true. Like, it's good that there are still throwback genres, like post-punk being one of the more potent, or ambient techno, like earlier I was saying. It's so cool that there's still great songs to be mined within those, like, formal structures, you know? Like, but then even be able to add with contemporary flair, like this has little glitch moments on it, for example, and things like that. It's got a very home-recorded sound once again, but, like home recording has come such a way where it can sound like you can just do it at home and it sounds like a cheap studio back in the day.
Yeah.
So it lends itself well to this sort of music. Like it reminds me of some of the better end of the sort of more underground end of the post-punk revival stuff, like an Eddie Curran or stuff like that. Or even things like from back in the day, like it reminded me a lot of like, more so than Athens music, like more like, where were Devo from?
Ohio.
Yeah, like Akron, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that sort of music. There's another band from LA called like Suburban Lawns.
Mm-hmm.
They sound quite a bit like that as well. And so I find it, which was sort of an underappreciated genre even at the time. So once again, so it's good that like people are still mining this sort of stuff. Like there was a band from England called Shame that was doing similar things. They had an album from like a year or two ago that was pretty good. And then an album after that I didn't listen to much of. But yeah, there's still bands out there, like younger bands that are taking that old post-punk sound and just like, they're able to like create new songs within that realm that like, they're just worth listening to. Like there's like 2 tracks on this album somewhere in the middle where I'm like, these are amazing songs.
Yeah, oh yeah.
You know, it's just like, yeah, who cares if the sound itself isn't new? It doesn't really matter, because when you get these new songs within that sound, it actually is new.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm definitely glad that people are still mining that world of like post-punk.
Yeah, I was really excited to hear newer, and this is a genre that I'm about to mention is indebted to technology, to be fair, but more so than this sort of post-punk music, for example. But remember how like there's like stuff like LTJ Buchem and there's all this new drum and bass, which is just absolutely extraordinary, you know?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Inspired music. And it's almost as though...
Yeah, drum and bass is on the comeback, or at least it was a couple years ago, very, very much. Yeah.
And it's amazing that this sort of music is falling into a similar vein right now. It's wow, more to be done. I'm sure people felt that way in the early 80s when some of these bands were coming out.
100%, because so many of them were just ignored. Yeah.
You know, I almost brought this album up earlier, but I might even discuss this in the future one day. I don't know. But a brilliant release I heard recently this is from 1990. You heard it as well. World Party's Goodbye Jumbo. I mean, in 1990, to hear pop songs that fresh, original, but yet timeless and sort of throwbacky would have been kind of astonishing. And the fact that, I mean, that's more of a mainstream sort of, British pop album, like as in British 60s sort of pop, throwback pop album. But, what we're talking about here is, I guess Pylon's the one's worth mentioning the most because even though like REM's evoking that sort of like Syd Barrett, Kevin Ayers pop structures as well, Pylon were a bit more. Well, I guess maybe it's more worth saying REM seemed a bit more melancholic and sort of maybe gospely than Pylon.
Yeah.
Whereas like I think Pylon are a bit more closer to songs that, correct me if I'm wrong, like, songs about traditional more rock and roll topics, like, what the Cars would sing about, or...
Yeah. Well, and they're much dancier, too.
Yeah,
they're less
dancier,
conceptual, yeah.
There you go, yeah.
It's, REM do a whole... Yeah, gospel's a good citation, definitely.
Mm.
And, yeah, they do the whole cryptic thing.
Yeah.
It's more like artsy-fartsy or whatever.
Yeah, one of the best things I've heard from 2024 so far is Omni Souvenir. I can't wait to hear more from this band, and actually I'm just fairly excited to hear the previous works from this band. I'll have to get onto that relatively soon, actually. I hope they're similarly likeable and enjoyable as this.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's it's kind of fresh to hear people still come up with like original ideas within that post-punk sound. Because definitely there's still, it's unmined land, There's still things to be found there. It's worth pursuing.
And like, even if, because perhaps 2024 may very well be the best year in music so far, if not for its ability to produce revolutionary music, which I think it is capable of doing as well, and has proven itself, certainly the 2020s has proven itself capable of doing a lot of the past 10 years in general, here and there. Maybe not in the absolute mainstream, but when has that been the case, to be fair? Sometimes not, it depends. We can at least have these perfected forms of older genres and modes that we know all too well, and find them even better than ever, more creative than ever, despite being stuff that we recognize. And the most fascinating thing is, in 2024, this stuff isn't even being made by AIs yet. It's being made by people. Maybe in anticipation and in sort of trepidation and fear, anxiety of AI, but all the same. I would love to hear... AI can be brilliant, but will AI ever truly do something as create a distinct guitar sound from Vinnie Riley's sax sound, as tenor sax sound as John Coltrane? If it does, I'm on board.
No, well, the thing is, like, you got to think about this AI as a tool. Like, it is the saxophone. Like, there's still a human playing the saxophone. I think it's a complete misconception.
All I'm saying is, look, if it does those things, that's fine too.
Yeah, no, but it's like the guy rambles on about in the song "Missiles," a live version, like an anti-nuclear thing by The Sound.
Yeah.
He's talking about technology, and the problem isn't the technology, and this is like 80s technology, because it's still contemporaneous in a weird way.
Yeah.
Like, it's the people who control the technology. Like, we're still the ones in charge. And I think that applies very much so to this weird new, like, AI quote-unquote revolution.
Yeah.
Which is just all a big media marketing hoax anyway.
Yeah.
These pattern recognition softwares have been around since, I was going to say the 90s, but probably long before that even. It's probably the first thing people were doing, tracking the internet or the ARPANET or whatever, back in the 70s.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm just sort of rambling. It's I think the AI itself is just a tool. Like, you still need someone, like the play button, the synthesizer.
Mm-hmm.
You still need human creativity behind the tool. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think they'll... Like, an intelligent system that composes music beyond, like, humans is a millennium away.
Mm-hmm.
It's... I think we've anthropomorphized the technology too much, where, like, we don't realize how in charge we actually are of it. It's not in charge of us. That's kind of ridiculous. In my mind, at least. I'm willing to be proven wrong by, like, an AI expert or whatever, but it even seems the experts, like, they harp on about how people who are in touch with, like, you know, relaying this stuff into, like, the media and the pop culture, people like Elon Musk and stuff, that have the doomer aspects of it, they seem to imply that, like, these are, like, even, like, Tucker Carlson on Joe Rogan, he's talking about how, like, we need to have conversations about what AI is going to do. But, like, fucking, they had these conversations 20 years ago. Like, they're ongoing conversations that are definitely being had. Like, so it's weird that the people within the media world are so doomist about it when really, like, these things do go on. Like, it's constant. Like, that's these people's jobs. Like,
Yeah.
But it's, I suppose it's people who aren't working, judging what people who are working are doing. So,
Yeah.
you know, there's a whole thing there I won't go into, but yeah, I think, like, AI, especially in music, alarmism is a weird world.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think there's any reason to be alarmed. I think there's reason to rejoice in a way. At least while we can. It'll be taken away from us, but we're in the wild west of it right now. People always talk about nostalgia for, like, 90s internet. It's like, well, here we are again, you know?
Yeah.
You're going to shut yourself off and just read the magazine? Or, you know? I'm speaking generally, obviously.
Yeah. I think we can all say potentially, with some optimism, bring on the remainder of this year of our Lord 2024.
Yeah. Who's Lord?